if it meant that you had to, if the government eventually loses this case, and it means you have to go to Parliament and get an Act of Parliament and go through all that, what people like Lisa and others, and Owen Smith said this, and she read his campaign, what they want is the government to lay out its negotiating cards, put the cards on the table before you get into the negotiating room. No one does that. It could mean a worse deal for the British people. That's what I mean. It's an attempt to frustrate it. It's an attempt to get a worse deal. That's not acceptable.
We want to know what you are aiming to do, because this will have a profound effect on people's jobs and people's lives, not just for this Parliament, but for decades and decades to come. And it seems to me not unreasonable that the government sets out its plan to us and to the country
campaign, and he called for a second referendum.
When you're going to have to set them out to Brussels on day one after we trigger Article 50.
Did you call for a second referendum? Did you support a second referendum?
I've never called for a second referendum.
Well, you led out his campaign. That was a centrepiece of his campaign.
I don't believe that we should have a second referendum.
So why did you support his campaign?
I don't think we need a parliamentary vote, but we do need a strategy.
Why did you support his campaign? He stood on Question Time and said we've got to have a second referendum.
Well, simply because I thought he was the best person to lead the Labour Party.
But wrong on this issue. The woman up there, with fair hair, in the second row from the top. Yeah.
We can talk about the ins and outs and the legalities of this for a very long time, but the fact is it's a total embarrassment. We're a laughingstock in Europe and beyond. The whole thing has been mucked up from the very beginning. A lot of public money is going to be diverted into fighting this. Money that should be used for public services. And Sajid Javid, I don't know why you're not more embarrassed than you are to represent your party today. It's an embarrassment.
OK, hold on a second. Charlie Wolf.
You know, as someone from Boston, where the original Tea Party was, I can only imagine if we had at the time, you know, as we were dressed up as Indians and going on that ship to dump the tea, someone said, wait, stop, let's make a vote. Someone want cream with that, sugars, you dump the tea. Get the hell out of the European Union. That's what we said. You know, that's end of the story. If I may, I know that the system here is the Queen in Parliament. But if I may refer back to my system, which I think is more the natural system of political science. In the United States, it's we the people. And however it's stated, ultimately, I think it is we the people. So Parliament, first off, I'm amazed that Parliament had to give the people permission, because the Parliament works for the people. Everybody works for the people.
So you're amazed that Parliament... You're amazed that Parliament had to do
when Parliament had a vote to give them a referendum, because...
Well, of course they had to have a vote to give them a referendum.
Yeah, but I understand that, but what I'm saying in a theoretical standpoint, it's still... The Parliament works for the people, not the other way around.
Yeah. Well, that's also a disconnect happening worldwide, really.
What bothers me, though, is the whole European exercise was giving away power that wasn't theirs to give away. So the people have spoken. We've gone to the source. So I don't know what has to be questioned in the courts when it's gone right to the source, to you folks, and you were the ones that said, we want out. Okay. End of story.
Yep. You said that, yes.
Mr. Javid mentioned six against one politicians voted in favour of the acts of referendum. If they'd have known what the result was, would it have been the same? I suspect not.
OK, and you, sir, along the row there, in blue. Yes.
Yeah, Sajid Javid also said we had a really robust debate about this, but part of the problem, I think, for the country was the very poor quality of that debate. And it strikes me that in a parliamentary democracy, which is what this country is supposed to be, it is entirely appropriate for this to go back to Parliament to discuss it properly. And sometimes I think we get confused between what democracy is, or parliamentary democracy, and populism. And populism is a dangerous slide. And I agree fully with what Hughie just said. Some decisions are too important, and a lack of strategic leadership has led us to that position.
And you said blue here in the front.
Yeah. I think you're missing a major constitutional issue. You're now facing, with an Act of Parliament, according to David Davis, if that's what's needed, you're going to have an unelected House of Lords blocking the will of the people. They have said, many in the House of Lords said they will block it. They're unelected. Where does democracy stand?
So do you think, as some say, there might be a general election as a result of this, where the Prime Minister says, look, you know, I know what I want to do, and I'll have an election to see whether the voters...
I believe if she has a single Act of Parliament on Article 50 and it's blocked, her most attractive move forward is to call an instant general election.
Right. And you here?
I think we all know the reason why the government and the cabinet don't want this to go into the Houses of Parliament is because they haven't got a clue what they are doing. Exactly. And the problem is the devil's in the detail here. OK, we had the referendum result, but the devil's in the detail. As anyone knows, once you start digging below and suddenly think, oh, what are we going to do about Ireland and this thing that was agreed in the 20s for free movement, but they're staying in the EU? And what are we going to do about the employment legislation? Are we going to say we can all work whatever hours we want to every week? And what are we going to do about this and that? And the devil's in the detail, and they have not got a clue what they're doing. The Three Musketeers are like this. They just don't know.
So that's your problem laid out, Sajid Javid. Do you agree with her?
Actually, I understand what she's saying, absolutely, and I think that it's perfectly reasonable for people to ask these kinds of questions, but the point is this, is that it's not the same thing as saying the government doesn't have a plan. Of course the government has a plan. Yeah. Right? Absolutely. Once the decision has been made, of course there's a plan. Well, but you would not expect a government to give you a running commentary on one of the most important negotiations that we face in the generation.
But nobody's getting any information at all. That's what they're complaining about.
You also remember, we've got to negotiate with 27 other countries. You would not lay all your cards on the table and say, this is what we want. No one enters negotiations in that way.
All right, the woman there shaking her head. You.
Sorry, this is our lives you're talking about. This is about the impact on our services. I work for the NHS at Great Ormond Street Hospital. If funding is cut, there is going to be a huge decrease in research. If you have a child who requires specialist services, that knowledge may not be there because that collaboration has been cut. 44 of research projects are going on collaboratively at Great Ormond Street Hospital. It gets millions of pounds for research. You have to have the people to come together to get the knowledge.
You're saying from the EU? From the EU, you're talking about.
The EU. 25% of all staff who are clinicians and 24% of all research staff come from non-British EU countries.
So you would want the government at this stage to reassure Great Ormond Street that whatever happens, you'll go on getting your research. Is that what you're saying?
I think we should not have I am very much a Remainer. I want us to stay in the EU. I want there to be freedom of movement. I want people to be able to come together, be collaborative, to do research, do tests. All of this stuff will be very much impaired if we leave the EU.
But the vote,
if you have one thing, I want the people who are leaving, who want to leave, I want them to one day unfortunately have a child who needs that treatment, but it's not there because the collaboration has not been there.
All right.
I'm sorry, but the research needs to continue.
What happened today was that it proves that democracy doesn't exist. We've lost it, and I'm afraid now is the time to say that we've given up. It's only in name only.
No, with the greatest respect, I don't think that is the case. I think that what today proved is that we have... It's not at all. Parliament, when it votes on...
We voted out, and they still don't accept it.
No, that's not what the High Court said. That is not what the High Court said. What the High Court ruling was is that there had to be a vote in Parliament because we are a parliamentary democracy. I don't think Parliament should overturn the will of the people. What I think there is a difference between direct democracy and referendums and parliamentary democracy.
And we are
there are representative democracies, which is what we have, where you elect an MP, the MPs then form a government. That is parliamentary democracy.
Can
I make one point, David? Which is in this discussion, and I completely agree with the lady who made the point earlier. The British people in this referendum voted to leave the EU. That should be respected. They did not vote for any particular destination, and there was a lot of discussion prior to the referendum where people were promised totally contradictory things that couldn't happen. What we need to have in this country is a serious debate about where we want to get to. That is not the same as giving every detail of the negotiating strategy away. It is having a discussion of what we want our relationship with Europe to be.
And that is also
seems very sensible.
But that is also not the same as saying there should be a vote specifically on Article 50 in Parliament. Since this vote, I can't think of a single day in Parliament where there hasn't been some kind of debate or discussion related to Brexit, and obviously that will continue for weeks and months
but
and possibly
no detail
years.
At all
there's a
from
new
your
select committee being set up, which you've said Hilary Benn is running this committee. So there's lots of scrutiny. This is about frustrating the will of the people. That's all that it's about.
This country,
That's all that it's about.
Sergio Javid, just let me ask you.
In this country
let me ask you one question. Are you fearful that if there was a simple vote in Parliament next week on the issue of whether Article 50 should be invoked, that Parliament would vote against it?
No,
after 17.5 million people have voted in favour?
That's what I'm not fearful about.
Well, what are you worried about?
What I would be concerned about is that process would lead to a much worse deal potentially for the British people. Britain would be the loser of that process.
What you think, sir? Are you worried that Parliament will vote?
We've already decided on. The rest of the world, and certainly this country, is going to pot. We're not dealing with the issues that need to be handled. We've got forced adoptions going on. We've got the NHS problems. We've got HS2 problems. Money that